On the night of July 13, 2019, a distressed 911 call was placed in the town of Inverness, Florida, by a panicked 17-year-old teenager named Carlos. The adolescent frantically requested assistance for his mother, Denise. He informed the operator that he had awoken from a nap to find his mother assaulted in her own bed, her cranium fractured with a hatchet. At that instant, the lady was still alive but unresponsive. The young man was in a state of panic, unsure of how to aid his cherished one, and the dispatcher was doing everything in their power to soothe him and guide him out of the residence. The emergency responder was uncertain if anyone else was present in the home who could potentially harm Carlos. Consequently, they sought to ensure that the teenager would remain secure while law enforcement was en route. This startling call directed law enforcement to the outskirts, to a spot quite isolated from the commotion. With their firearms ready, the officers cautiously entered the residence to investigate if anyone else was present. Proceeding from one area to another, they found that the house was empty, except for one bedroom where Denise Hollowell lay on the bed. It was a gruesome scene. A hatchet was embedded in the back of her skull. The act was carried out with such intensity that only a few inches of the blade protruded from her head. Despite this, the paramedics still attempted to administer first aid to the woman, but sadly, Denise could not be rescued. That very night, she was pronounced deceased. The authorities were perplexed as to why someone would need to forcibly enter the home to end the life of the occupant while sparing her son and not taking anything valuable. The house was situated in a remote location, close to a lake. There were a few neighboring residences nearby, but they all belonged to Denise's friends. Carlos, the victim's son, provided a similar account. He had no clue who could have been responsible for this, as everyone in the vicinity was either a friend of his mother or an acquaintance from church. According to popular opinion, Denise Hollowell was an exceptional individual in every way. Her generosity and kindness inspired all who interacted with her. She was a woman with a warm heart, a bright smile, and a contagious laugh who was deeply committed to those she cherished, both friends and family. Denise had been married twice, but these relationships, it turned out, did not have a long-term future. The woman once again returned to the lakeside house that had been in her family for 3 generations. Close by was the residence of her dearest friend, Emmy. Their families had resided on adjacent lots their entire lives. The girls grew up side by side, and as adults, they maintained an excellent relationship. Denise simultaneously pursued her teaching degree while working as a veterinary technician. After obtaining her diploma, she proudly began teaching. And in addition to this profession, the woman also engaged in community activities in her neighborhood. Denise was deeply committed to the area where she lived, volunteering at local charities or independently organizing fundraisers to assist a family in need. Hollowell strived to live for others, and this gave her a sense of fulfillment. In her own worldview, a small piece of the puzzle was missing to make life shine with new colors. Denise longed to become a mother. She did not have a strong relationship that would serve as the foundation for a happy family life. With each passing year, the possibility of giving birth to a child on her own became increasingly elusive. But for Denise, this did not play a significant role because her heart held enough love and tenderness for an adopted baby. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. The truth is that she was also adopted by foster parents. She recalled the feeling of joy when she was selected from a group of children, so she wanted to give the same wings that she once had to a child left in the care of the state. Denise was unaware that she had the ability to provide these kids with the life they deserve. Primarily, Hollowell located an adoption agency where there were children from Central America, and this led her to encounter a delightful little boy from Guatemala. His name was Carlos, and he became her son. From the first glance, from the first embrace, Denise adored Carlos as her own child, and they instantly became inseparable. Subsequently, the woman even got a tattoo on her ankle with the name of her firstborn. Evidently, the Hollowell family, consisting of 2 individuals, was incredibly joyful. Carlos proved to be the son every parent would wish for. The boy excelled in school, even skipping one grade by passing exams externally. He was excellent at sports and very well liked among other classmates. At one point, he got a girlfriend who really adored him. A serious relationship was developing between them, and Denise and the girl's parents considered them a wonderful couple and were already making plans for the future. From a charming, brown-eyed boy, Carlos transformed into a very mature young man. Everyone adored him, especially his mother. They said that there was an incredibly close bond between them. Even Denise's friend Emmy was envious of her because she had constant problems with her own children. Denise adored her son immensely. She wanted to give him absolutely everything in her power. The woman herself was not particularly interested in having more children. With the arrival of Carlos, her dreams of motherhood were completely fulfilled. At some point, she thought that perhaps the boy would be happier if he had a brother or sister. They say that the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Denise did adopt another child, an 8-year-old boy from Honduras at the time of adoption. His name was Angel, and he was supposed to become Carlos's younger brother. This is where everything turned out entirely different from what was originally planned. The relationship with Angel turned out differently, and the hopes for a happy family life crumbled like a house of cards. In 2015, a few years prior to her passing, Denise had to contact law enforcement and report Angel missing, as she was unable to locate him anywhere. The patrol officers who arrived first and foremost prepared a protocol and wanted to examine the teenager's room, after which they had a mixed reaction towards the child's mother and the entire situation in general. Angel's room and what they observed in it left the officers somewhat perplexed. By that time, the boy was 12 years old, so they anticipated seeing posters on the walls, a plethora of toys and gadgets, as is typical for children of his age. However, instead, they encountered a completely empty room, except for an inflatable mattress on a frame and a bucket that was intended to be used as a toilet. The window was boarded shut, and there were locks on the outside of the door to secure the room from the outside. While the police were investigating the house, Denise located Angel on her own. He was concealing himself in a neighbor's shed. The officers wanted to ask the boy a few questions to ascertain what was happening, and then a very unsightly picture began to emerge. Angel informed the police that he was treated very poorly in the Hollowell house. Every night he was locked in his bedroom and permitted to leave the room only to perform housework. And even when he went out to do housework, he was compelled to do it completely naked. He also reported that Denise and Carlos frequently beat him with their fists below the belt. It all appeared so terrible that Denise was arrested and charged with very serious accusations of abusing her son. Both teenagers were removed from her custody. Carlos attempted to assist his mom and post bail for her to get her out of jail, but ultimately it wasn't necessary. Denise's lawyer was able to persuade the judge to release her under house arrest with an electronic ankle bracelet. The entire situation in the Hollowell family caused outrage in the community. Denise was a teacher and a mother of 2 children. The woman was accused of inappropriate treatment of her own son. At the time this occurred, she was teaching natural sciences and social sciences at a private school. Because of this whole situation, Denise could not return to work. The management placed her on administrative leave until the situation with the accusation and arrest was finally clarified. The students' parents were informed that nothing like this had been noticed about Denise before. She had an impeccable teaching career. But who knows what can happen behind closed doors at home? Despite the fact that the woman was released from prison under house arrest, she could not work, and therefore could not pay the bills. For her, the situation with Angel's escape ended in disaster. She lost her children. Credit card debts were mounting, her reputation as a teacher was ruined, and Denise's whole life was practically destroyed. It would seem that this is precisely what she deserved if she really treated her own children badly. All this happened primarily because of Angel's words, but as soon as the investigation commenced and the police began to delve into the details of the case, everything started to seem far-fetched and false. There was no evidence that Denise had mistreated her sons. She did not deny that she had spanked the mischievous child on the soft spot a couple of times for his pranks. This was the maximum extent of physical punishment. The question arose whether to consider this physical and whether it could be called a crime. The woman also explained that she nailed the window in Angel's room shut, as the boy had a propensity to run away. He would sneak away in the middle of the night through the window, and then she would have to search for him for several hours. For the same reason, she installed a lock on the door of his room. Perhaps it was a mistake, but Denise felt that she had no other options. She spoke to a psychologist about this and consulted with the local pastor, but no advice or recommendations helped. Moreover, Angel had serious problems with behavior and anger. Therefore, there was nothing in his room. The boy simply destroyed all things regardless of their value. Denise felt helpless and responsible for her child, and just did everything in her power. As a mother, she had to be sure that her son would not harm himself or anyone else, and she simply could not just give up on him. Confirmation of Denise's words could be found in her diary, where she wrote down everything that happened with Angel for 3 years. There were recommendations from doctors and conversations with a priest. The woman described every step of hers, built an upbringing plan, tried various approaches to this difficult child. After Denise was charged, she tried to hand these notes over to the police to explain her behavior, but they simply ignored it. The eldest son, Carlos, fully corroborated his mother's words about both the boarded-up windows and the empty room. The boy said that Angel was constantly eager for freedom, not wanting to lead a normal life. After all, the lack of control in childhood apparently left an imprint on his behavior. Carlos said that Denise had never insulted her sons, but Angel could easily attack with his fists. The boy even felt incredible aggression towards animals, offending the dogs kept in the house. All this information made the police wonder if Denise's arrest was a mistake, and this soon became apparent. Both boys were given to a foster family where Angel immediately had problems with behavior and outbursts of aggression and violence towards his foster parents. The boy fought with the father of the family and blackmailed him. He threatened to complain to the police that he was being mistreated if the man did not indulge his desires. This is the very maneuver he performed at the Hollowell house. It got to the point that other families began to refuse Angel. The charges against Denise were dropped, and now she had the most difficult task of restoring her shattered reputation. No matter how pure your intentions are, there will always be someone who will find negative aspects in them. It wasn't easy to get back on track. It took Denise a year to secure another job as a teacher. Her students were individuals suffering from autism, and as an educator she was successful. But before that she had to surmount a lot. Her boys were still not with her, although Denise was a great mother to them. She attended all their sports events, took them on vacation, was very attentive and involved in their lives. After all, she loved them and wanted them to have their own permanent home. In the end, she managed to get Carlos back. But regarding Angel, the specialists advised her to think carefully, since after the events that transpired, it would not be easy for both of them. By law, she could take him back, but the social welfare authorities recommended that Denise relinquish her parental rights for the child's benefit, which the woman did, although it was a very painful choice for her. This was the story of the Hollowell family before the tragic events when Denise was found with a fractured skull in her own bed. Rumors and speculations immediately began to circulate in the community that the person responsible for the death could be her son Angel, who harbored a grudge against his adoptive mother, and this could have been close to the truth. But such a possibility was soon refuted, since the boy was in a juvenile detention center at that time, and therefore could not have been involved in Denise's death. The police made every effort to uncover what actually happened. They searched in the air, on the ground, and even checked the lake. Canine services and volunteer search groups were involved. A survey of neighbors in this area revealed rather alarming information. Many believed that Denise might have become a target for some reason, because recently, strange things had begun to occur in their area. People began to notice that the flow of cars entering and leaving this area had increased. Then, a mysterious fire happened in the Hollowell house, the cause of which was never established. Neighbors said that Denise's pets had disappeared several times. The inhabitants of the house were also worried about their safety. They even installed a camera and hung signs near their property indicating video recording. However, all this was just speculation because from the first day, the police already had someone in their sights. It was none other than Carlos, the boy from Guatemala whom Denise adopted at the age of 4. After receiving a call from him to 911, the patrol officers found the boy on the street. Carlos was literally going crazy when he was told that Denise had passed away. Since he was the only person who was at home at the time, he was taken to the station for interrogation. The young man recounted what he and his mother were doing that day. Everything was as usual. In the morning, they went on business to the funeral of a family friend, then returned home, buying 2 pies at a bakery on the way. At home, they had a snack of fresh baked goods and decided to take a little nap. Each went to their own bedroom. Carlos watched some YouTube videos before falling asleep. Then at some point he woke up, answered a few messages, and fell asleep again. The boy was fast asleep when the dogs started barking outside, although they were usually kept on the other side of the house. At first he thought that Denise had let them out, but the barking did not stop, and Carlos, shaking off the remnants of drowsiness, got up and went outside. Then he noticed that the front door was wide open. After calling out to the 4-legged pets, the young man looked around for his mother, but she was nowhere to be seen. Then he decided to check the bedroom and stumbled upon a terrible sight. Denise was lying on the bed with an axe sticking out of her head. The boy heard her trying to breathe but didn't know what to do so as not to aggravate the situation. Carlos even tried to shake his mother slightly, but she did not respond. When the police asked Carlos who he thought could have done such a thing, he said that his mother had no enemies. The only people she communicated with always treated her warmly. They themselves lived in such a wilderness that they could hardly bother anyone. For some reason, Carlos's story did not inspire confidence in the investigators. Most likely it was because they already had some information that helped form a more complete picture. There were no signs of a break-in, and the theory of an intruder looked far-fetched from the very beginning. The relationship between mother and son was not really as good as Carlos described. Just a few months ago, the police were called to the Hollowell home after the son attacked his mother. As a result, the woman received a concussion and broke her arm. When the boy was reminded of this incident, he reported that after that, he and Denise had reconciled, and besides, their quarrel could not be called a fight. They just pushed each other. Then he apparently realized how it looked from the outside, and his story changed abruptly. Carlos informed the Guardians of Order that his mother constantly insulted him, could hit him in the face, head, back, everything she could reach. After that quarrel, he even moved out of her house. The young man complained that he had mental health problems. This was confirmed by his acquaintances and friends. He really looked anxious and tense. It was at that time that Carlos began to heavily use illegal drugs and even thought about voluntary suicide. Denise took him to a clinic where a doctor prescribed Carlos medication for depression and also diagnosed him with suspected bipolar disorder. After treatment, the young man felt much better. His mood stabilized, he and his mother mended their relationship, and he returned home. However, the correction of the situation was due to the fact that Denise agreed with the list of demands of her adopted son. Carlos wanted his mother to buy him a reliable car for trips to college. After he turned 18, she would still have to make a financial contribution to his college education, and these were not just demands on paper. The boy wanted Denise to sign it and have it notarized. Such were the complicated relationships that developed in the Hollowell family. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. According to reports from Denise's neighbor and closest friend, Emmy, the mother was truly afraid of her son when he became addicted to psychotropic substances. The woman even installed several cameras to monitor what was happening and asked Emmy to take care of her dogs if something happened to her. During the interrogation, Carlos behaved a little defiantly and was very offended when the officers told him about their suspicions. He stated that he would never harm his mother. She was the only person he truly loved. Despite all the detectives' attempts to make him confess, he did not break down and continued to claim that he was not involved in his mother's death. Since the police currently had no specific evidence, they had to release Carlos. Because he was only 17 years old, he could not stay alone in the house. The investigators tried to take the teenager to his girlfriend's house, but the girl's parents, who had always been favorably disposed to their friendship, refused to accept him. The whole situation with Denise looked suspicious, and they did not want to create unnecessary problems for themselves because of this boy. Not only his girlfriend and her parents turned away from Carlos, but some friends also began to distance themselves over time. There was a hint of falsehood in his stories about his mother. The only person who agreed to have the young man in her home was Emmy, Denise's friend. She was so devastated by the death of a close person with whom she planned to meet old age next door that despite all her fears, she took Carlos to her place. The woman tried to keep him busy so that he could endure the loss of his mother, helped him plan Denise's funeral, and stayed with him as much as possible. Only in Emmy's soul was there a fear that the young man had something to do with what happened to her friend. At night, she locked the door to her bedroom and listened for extraneous sounds for a long time. At the same time, she felt very guilty about this feeling. Carlos was perhaps just a little boy, frightened by such tragic events. However, as soon as she saw that there was not a drop of sadness in his eyes, suspicions revived again. Meanwhile, Carlos was not grieving at all. He seemed more excited about getting an inheritance than about the absence of Denise in his life. However, despite outward manifestations in his diary, he wrote how much he missed his mother and asked her to come back, not to leave him, that he would never be able to get the vision of how she lay completely motionless out of his head. All these inconsistencies clearly indicated psychological problems. 9 weeks later, the police called Carlos for another interrogation. He insisted that after finding his mother in a terrible state, he did not leave the house. However, his mobile phone showed otherwise. The teenager was near the lake. The boy tried to object, but when he was told that divers had already searched the reservoir and found something at the bottom, he broke down and told a completely different version of events. The detective pulled out a box to show Carlos the items found in the water. There were 3 surveillance cameras that previously hung in the house's corridors, and Denise's cell phone. Unfortunately, the police could not get any useful information from these devices, since they had been in the water for some time. But Carlos did not know about this, so he was overwhelmed with panic. Before that, he had already told investigators that there were no cameras inside the house, and the one outside was broken. During the search, the police noticed that in those places where the recording devices were once attached, there were characteristic traces, and there were also cables for connection everywhere. So the boy lied. Since the cameras themselves were not in the house, the detectives decided to search the entire area around the building, including the bottom of the lake. Now Carlos's narrative was based on the fact that he did not remember anything. He and Denise returned home from a family friend's funeral, had a snack of pies, and went to rest. The teenager woke up to the dogs barking, found his mother with an axe in the back of her head, and called the emergency service. The only thing was that now he already allowed the thought that he could have done it himself, but somehow it was erased from his memory. He panicked, tore off all the cameras, grabbed his mother's phone, and for some reason threw it into the water. But this was also a lie, because based on the data from his mobile phone, the police already knew that on that day he did not even go to bed. Carlos was using his gadget all the time. Caught in another lie, he again slightly changed the story. The boy said that he remembered sharpening an axe for some reason, and the next memory was an axe sticking out of his own mother's head. But how it happened, he did not understand. It was definitely not planned. He was brought to his senses by the blood streaming from Denise's nose. The young man, realizing what he had done, wanted to fix it and immediately called 911 in the hope of saving the life of his mother, the woman who completely changed his present. He insisted that he did not understand how he could attack her. It was some kind of clouding of the mind. Now that he had confessed, he felt better, but his soul was gnawed by guilt. He would never be able to forgive himself for what he had done. The reason Carlos was able to hack his mother with an axe was that the woman verbally insulted him, often humiliated him, told him that he was a loser, and how disappointed she was in his behavior. In part, this was true, because witnesses were found who confirmed this, and there were several audio recordings where Denise scolded her son. On the day when the teenager wanted to take his own life and crashed into a tree in a car, Denise was more worried about the damage done to her red pickup truck than about the fact that her son might have been trying to commit suicide. She was so upset by the damage to the truck that she began to reproach her son again, saying that it was only thanks to her that he lived in the United States. It's hard to learn that the victim was not actually a good person either, or at least did not correspond to the concepts of a loving mother. However, this does not mean that she deserved a terrible death at the hands of her adopted son. From the outside, their relationship always looked very close and trusting, and many were jealous. The truth began to come out only after the death of Denise. For the first 7 years, everything really went well. At the age of 11, the teenager tried alcohol, weed, and intoxicating pills. Moreover, he himself began to engage in their distribution. This explains why various cars began to arrive in such a remote area, and some suspicious individuals began to appear. Once upon a time, Carlos did well in school, but now his performance dropped sharply, and then he was completely expelled from the school's graduation class. He managed to hide it from his mother for several months. When Denise finally found out, she set herself the goal of putting the child back on the right path. Perhaps out of desperation, she told him all these unpleasant things. At first, Carlos silently listened to all the reproaches and insults from his mother, then took an axe and went into the forest, where he began to chop trees, visualizing that his mother was in front of him. He remembered all the offensive words she said in the heat of the moment and vented his anger on the pine trunks, and then returned home. On that day, July 13th, 2019, after the funeral, he and Denise had a big fight. She again began to reproach him about his friends and his destructive addiction. Carlos told his mother that he wanted to go to technical college instead of a 4-year school, but Denise rejected this idea as not corresponding to what she wanted for her son. The woman refused to pay for his studies, calling her son a loser and the main disappointment in her life. At the end of the conversation, tears appeared in his eyes, after which the teenager took an axe and took his mother's life. Carlos was arrested. The young man's first question was how soon he would be released, because he was going to go to college, and when he learned that he would go to prison, he was very upset because of the presence of a future criminal record. The boy was interested in whether it could somehow be removed from the records later, so that it would not affect his future life. In general, he behaved far from like an adult, and was so detached from reality that he did not understand the essence of what was happening. Carlos was tried as an adult, despite the fact that at the time of the crime he was 17 years old. The prosecution insisted on the premeditation of the young man's actions. He did not plead guilty, and the defense insisted that his actions were not planned initially. He succumbed to emotions. The lawyer stated that Carlos had mental health problems and the feelings of a child who was abandoned in early childhood. All this, combined with Denise's aggressive and harsh parenting style, made him short-tempered. The defense convinced the jury that the boy was subjected to psychological abuse by his deceased mother, and that is why he took her life. The jury was not told that Carlos had previously had a brother, or that Denise had previously been accused of child abuse. The prosecution, in turn, painted a picture of a selfish child who chose the wrong path and was angry because his mother tried to impose her own principles on him and did not let him live the way he wanted. And Carlos liked to drink alcohol, smoke weed, and take intoxicating substances. He dreamed of throwing parties, not studying in a 4-year school, but at the same time, Denise fully financed him, regardless of whether she agreed with such a life or not. The prosecutor added that Miss Hollowell did not deserve to die. She did everything that any mother in her place would do, and all this was for the future of her son. The jury retired for deliberation. After an hour and a half, they returned with a decision to find Carlos Hollowell guilty of his mother's death. It remained only to wait for the sentence. Although the boy was tried as an adult because of his age, he could not be subjected to the death penalty. He faced from 40 years to life imprisonment. The judge had to take into account 10 different factors when making a decision, including the nature of the crime, Carlos's mental state, and everything that the defense and prosecution team said in their speeches. Ultimately, the judge concluded that Carlos Hollowell was an incorrigible criminal who had no chance of rehabilitation. He made an independent choice in favor of alcohol and prohibited drugs. His immaturity at the time of the crime had nothing to do with the fact that he committed the crime, given that the defendant attacked his mother when she was in the most vulnerable state. It was not a sudden surge of emotions, a state of passion. The motive for the crime was Denise's money, real estate, her car, and all her property. Experts who met with Carlos determined that he had 16 out of 20 criteria for a psychopathological syndrome manifested in the form of heartlessness towards others, a reduced ability to empathize, a lack of sincere remorse, and other signs. A person suffering from such a syndrome is not capable of rehabilitation. During the sentencing hearing, Carlos made a statement to the court, but in reality he was simply talking to his deceased mother, saying that she could hear everything, that she was not there with him. In the words addressed to Denise, the young man expressed remorse and regret for his wrongdoing. At such a young age, Carlos Hollowell was sentenced to life in prison because he committed an unforgivable and irreparable crime against the person closest to him. His sentence can be reviewed after 25 years, in 2044. Carlos himself seemed to have come to terms with his sad fate and accepted what he had done. Sometime later, he even gave an interview. Finally, he was able to tell the whole story of his crime from his own perspective. Carlos told journalists that for some time, he and Denise had everything going wonderfully. Their relationship changed and everything went downhill as soon as Angel appeared in the house. The mother changed, became more tense, aggressive, and as a result, very cruel. After Denise's arrest, when both sons were taken away from her, everything became completely different. At some point, it seemed to Carlos that he had lost his home again and was deprived of everything he had, but at the same time, he felt a kind of freedom and impunity. After returning to Denise's house, there was no longer the closeness between the son and mother that there was initially. Then, when he got older, he realized that his mother expected too much from him. She wanted him to become more independent and start making a financial contribution to the household. Every time he got into bad company or relapsed, she became more and more disappointed in him. That day, they had a big fight over the technical college where Carlos wanted to go to study, and Denise said too much. When she fell asleep, the young man was working in the yard, chopping something with an axe. Then he wanted to drink. He entered the house. His mother's last words were spinning in his head. Carlos looked into the room and saw that Denise was sleeping. Then he raised the axe and swung with all his might, trying not to look at her. There was no real reason to take her life. He himself admitted it and agreed that his mother did not deserve it. The charming and diligent Michelle Huang Giles was a nursing student from the United States. She entered the world on October 3, 1984, in San Diego, California. Her parents were Vietnamese immigrants who had relocated to California in the 1970s to flee the conflict. After a perilous journey on an open boat and time spent in refugee camps, they slowly began to grasp American culture, living together with many family members. Although Michelle was raised in America, her family always cherished Vietnamese customs. The girl's mother was an exceptional individual and served as a true inspiration. As a nurse herself, Michelle's mother inspired her daughter to pursue the same career path. Being the oldest of 15 cousins, Michelle consistently looked after her younger siblings and acted as a second mother to them. She was raised in San Diego's Rancho Penasquitos neighborhood, a suburb with abundant parks, family-friendly coffee shops, and highly regarded public schools. It was a secure environment where a large, tight-knit Vietnamese family enjoyed spending time together. In 1994, when Michelle was 10 and her brother Michael was 7, their mother discovered she had breast cancer. To protect her children from fear and sorrow, she concealed her diagnosis and suffered silently. The children only learned the truth after her passing in 1999. They had no idea that their mother had been battling this fight alone for years, selflessly sacrificing her own emotions to shield them from the devastating news. It was challenging for everyone, particularly 14-year-old Michelle, who tried to remain strong and care for her brother. Following their mother's death, they moved in with their aunt, who was raising several children their age. There, they found support and could share their grief with relatives. Michael took his mother's loss extremely hard, and over time Michelle had to become more than just a sister to him, serving as a mentor. At the same time, she developed a special bond with her cousin Christina, which was incredibly valuable to her. Christina helped Michelle navigate her teenage years, the most challenging period after her mother's death, as the girls were always together. In return, Michelle taught Christina the intricacies of womanhood, helping her write her first love letter, shopping for her first bra, and teaching her how to pluck her eyebrows, apply makeup, and straighten her hair. Michelle's attractiveness often caught the attention of young men, but she was too shy to engage with them. However, one day at a cafe, Michelle found herself sharing a table with a girl named Giselle Divac Esteban, and they eventually became best friends. Michelle's outgoing nature helped the quiet, reserved Giselle come out of her shell. The girls enjoyed movies together, visited each other, had fun, and discussed boys. They had much in common, as Giselle also came from a Filipino-American immigrant family, grew up in San Diego, and was raised in a close-knit, hard-working family. Both girls were ambitious, with Michelle wanting to honor her mother's memory by becoming a nurse. Soon, Giselle also became excited about pursuing a career in medicine. They graduated from high school together in 2002 and applied to college to prepare for nursing school. The friends moved to San Francisco for a change of environment, greater independence, and more opportunities. Michelle and Giselle initially attended different colleges, focusing intently on their studies while maintaining contact. However, in the spring of 2003, Michelle transferred to her friend's college, where she formed many new friendships, including one with a guy named Scott Marasigan. Although Michelle and Scott instantly connected, they chose to remain friends rather than pursuing a romantic relationship. By fall, Giselle and Scott began spending significantly more time together. Despite originally intending to date Scott herself, Michelle wholeheartedly supported their romance. The friends frequently went on double dates, but as time passed, they began to see each other less frequently as they embarked on new chapters in their lives. Giselle became fully immersed in her relationship with Scott, while Michelle diligently worked to acquire the knowledge needed to enter nursing school. As the years went by, Giselle and Scott welcomed a daughter, Isabel, in the fall of 2005. The young mother decided to pause her college education to prioritize her family. She secured a job at a kindergarten, but after a couple of years, the couple separated due to conflicts primarily stemming from Giselle's excessive jealousy. During this period, Michelle secured a position as an accountant at a firm and was also involved in a serious relationship with a guy named Tommy. Communication between the two friends dwindled to brief messages on social media and holiday greetings. In August 2010, Michelle was accepted into an accelerated nursing program at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland, California. Instead of the typical 2-year training, she was set to earn her nursing degree in just 12 months. The program was rigorous and intensive, requiring high scores on entrance exams and strong recommendations. Out of numerous applications, only about 300 students were admitted, making Michelle immensely proud of her achievement. She immediately shared the news with her best school friend, Giselle. Both girls longed to rekindle their former friendship, but Michelle dedicated all her free time to work and study. Giselle also resolved to resume her studies, as she and Scott now shared custody of their 5-year-old daughter. These years were the most thrilling for Michelle as she lived out her dream. Her younger brother, Michael, also decided to pursue a career in medicine, working as a paramedic in an ambulance while studying psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. The theoretical portion of the accelerated program concluded as swiftly as it began, and Michelle now needed to complete a rotation at a nearby Kaiser hospital. In medicine, A rotation involves exposing students to various departments or specialties to gain diverse experience and expand their knowledge and skills. By May 2011, at the age of 26, Michelle was completing a rotation in the maternity ward of Kaiser Hospital. Before the weekend, she had to work her final shift to earn an excellent grade. During one of the breaks, shortly before 7 p.m., the student informed a nurse in the department that she would be going down to her car, parked in the attached hospital garage, to retrieve some medication. Around 9 p.m., the medical staff training instructor gathered all the students in the office to summarize the final exam and distribute grades. It was only then that everyone realized Michelle Lee had not returned after going to the parking lot, and no one had seen her since. The instructor, accompanied by a security guard, went down to the multi-level garage, thinking that the girl might have fallen ill and required assistance. The spot where Michelle usually parked her brand-new white Honda was vacant. They decided to walk through the rows of cars to ensure that Michelle had not relocated her vehicle. As they searched, they noticed a white SUV entering the garage. The instructor began waving her hands, attempting to catch the student's attention, but instead of stopping, the driver reversed and accelerated, nearly colliding with a neighboring car. The situation appeared highly unusual and perplexing. If Michelle needed to leave urgently, why didn't she notify the hospital staff? It seemed as though she was intentionally avoiding an encounter with the instructor. The student had no issues with her studies, and on the last day she acted normally, displaying no signs of distress. What could have transpired in those couple of hours that prompted Michelle to hastily depart from the hospital? The instructor and other students, including Michelle's boyfriend, tried reaching her by calling and texting her cell phone, but no one received a response. Around 10 p.m., the instructor, unable to wait any longer, contacted the Hayward Police Department, reporting that Michelle Lee was missing or in distress. The woman firmly believed that a successful student would not abandon classes in the middle of the final clinical trials required to obtain a nursing diploma. As Michelle was an adult, the police did not rush to initiate an investigation. They dispatched an officer to the hospital to gather details about the case. The officer recorded all the information about the missing girl, the make of her car, and the contact information of her classmates and friends. Michelle's purse and house keys were left in the staff break room, as she had intended to step out for just a few minutes. The police officer planned to wait and see if the girl would appear the following day. From early morning, Michelle's closest friends and colleagues eagerly awaited the detective assigned to the case. The inspector discovered that the student's recently purchased car had an anti-theft device installed, similar to those found on new vehicles to track their location. It didn't take the detectives long to locate the car, which was parked in the guest parking lot near one of the townhouses on Ponderosa Court, just a 2-minute drive and about 3 miles from Kaiser Hospital. The car was unlocked and showed no external damage. Through the tinted windows, officers could see several open packages from an online store, a pair of shoes from a catalog, and a purse containing prescriptions issued at pharmacies inside the back seat. It seemed that Michelle had gone to retrieve these medicines that evening. In the front, there was a can of soda in the cup holder and a small stain on the front passenger seat. The car appeared relatively clean due to its newness. It didn't even have metal license plates, only paper ones from the dealership. Without a search warrant, the police could only inspect the vehicle from the outside. Upon looking underneath, they noticed several grassy stems caught on one of the doors, indicating that the car had recently been driven off-road. The detectives were puzzled as to why Michelle had left her car there, as none of her friends lived in this complex. After questioning the locals, they learned that the car was most likely parked there early in the morning, as one witness had seen headlights at 4 a.m. and heard someone talking. However, the identity of this person remains unknown, as the witness did not look out the window. To conduct a thorough forensic examination, the Honda was towed to a police parking lot. After obtaining a warrant, a team of forensic experts could then check the interior for any clues that might provide insight into the car owner's disappearance. Michelle's former boyfriend, Tommy, sent a message to her brother Michael and cousin Christina about the disappearance. Initially, Neither Michael nor Christina took his message seriously, assuming that the young couple had simply argued and that Michelle was not answering the phone because she did not want to communicate with Tommy. However, when they themselves could not reach the girl, they began to genuinely worry. Unexpectedly, on May 27th, around 12:45, all of Michelle's friends started receiving messages from her. The girl explained that she had not disappeared and that there was no need to search for her. She stated that she was going through a moment in her life where she just wanted to be alone. She attributed her lack of response to phone problems. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing this. The detective leading the case immediately dialed Michelle's number, but the girl once again ignored the call, responding with an SMS message saying that her phone was discharged and she was looking for a charger. And after that, at 2 p.m., all calls automatically started going to voicemail. Meanwhile, the police finally managed to obtain footage from the surveillance cameras in the garage. However, before they could glean any information, they had to view more than 100 hours of video from different angles, frame by frame. The footage showed the girl walking briskly from the hospital towards the garage via a pedestrian bridge. It was evident that she was in a hurry, as she had to return within a few minutes. The forensic team analyzed the car's interior and made a discovery. Tucked under the front passenger seat was an identification badge belonging to a certain Elaine San Augustin, an assistant instructor from the Samuel Merritt School of Nursing. It turned out that this was a pass for a new employee of the institution who had not even started work yet. The question remained: what connection could this unknown woman have to the student's disappearance? The evidence discovered led investigators to believe that Michelle was no longer alive. Inside the car, bloodstains were found on the back seat, along with smeared traces on the passenger door and mat. Detectives surmised that the injured girl had been lying right there. The blood belonged to the owner of the Honda, Michelle Lee, and based on the quantity, the attack appeared to have been quite violent. Erased bloodstains were also found in the hospital parking lot, where Michelle's SUV was parked, indicating that the attack had taken place within the garage. Experts also collected fingerprints from inside the cabin and several hairs for subsequent DNA analysis. As the police did not disclose the investigation details, Michelle's family and friends continued to hope for her safe return. When the detective spoke with the missing student's loved ones, he learned about Michelle's long-standing friendship with Giselle Esteban. Although the girls had not been close recently, the officer deemed it necessary to speak with her, considering the possibility that the secret to the disappearance might lie in Michelle's past. Giselle's apartment was located in Union City, just a 10-minute drive from Kaiser Hospital. Upon opening the door, the hostess seemed slightly annoyed to learn that the conversation would revolve around Michelle Lee. She did not express much concern about her disappearance and behaved far from how a friend would. Giselle explained that Michelle was not as perfect as she initially appeared, possessing the ability to conceal a mean nature behind a veneer of virtue. She accused Michelle of being a liar and once betraying her by hitting her where it hurt the most, sleeping with Giselle's fiancé. Giselle was aware that Michelle and Scott Marasigan had dated for a month. Despite believing their relationship had ended, she began to notice that they continued to flirt with each other. Both her friend and boyfriend categorically denied any connection beyond friendship, but Giselle saw the way her fiancé looked at Michelle. Her suspicions were confirmed when her friend shared an intimate secret about an aborted pregnancy with Scott instead of her. This incident left Giselle feeling not only betrayed but also realizing that the two people closest to her, whom she trusted the most, had been lying to her. They both maintained that there had never been a close relationship between them, but Giselle was convinced that this too was a blatant lie, and that Scott had cheated on her with her best friend. Even after Giselle and Scott broke up, she remained in contact with Michelle and knew that the two of them continued to communicate, assuring everyone that they were just friends. At the time, Giselle was in her 3rd month of pregnancy and was unlikely to have the physical strength to confront the girl on her own. While the police were conducting their investigation, family members, friends, volunteers, and concerned citizens refused to give up hope of finding Michelle. Even relatives from Vietnam came to support their loved ones. They all made efforts to keep her name in the media spotlight. They created t-shirts with her photo, distributed flyers, and established a website that served as the hub for all new information about the student. The family offered a reward of $65,000, with $45,000 of that amount donated by the company where Michelle had worked for 5 years. The family also hung a huge billboard on the highway, dreaming that the girl would return to them alive and unharmed. They deeply missed her and pleaded for assistance in the search. The police also kept a close eye on the behavior of Scott Marasigan, Giselle Esteban's ex-boyfriend and the father of her child. Like many others, the guy appeared to be upset about Michelle's disappearance. Since the detectives considered the possibility that the attack could have been carried out by more than one person, they explored various scenarios. They tracked the location of Michelle's phone after it left the medical center parking lot. Initially, it pinged on busy streets, then on a very small 2-lane road leading to the main highway. Afterward, it returned to the medical center along the same route. Search teams scoured this area, which consisted of canyons, rivers, streams, and rural land. Despite the involvement of numerous volunteers, the search yielded no results. It was akin to searching for a needle in a haystack. Detectives reviewed the parking lot video footage hundreds of times, striving to notice something they had previously overlooked. They observed that when Michelle was walking to her car, her direction changed slightly, as if she had spotted someone. It appeared that this person was waiting for her near the car. As soon as the girl got closer, she was attacked, shoved into the back seat, and taken away. Furthermore, the surveillance camera footage enabled the police to deduce that the identification badge had been stolen, as it could be used to gain access to certain materials on campus. The badge functioned as a key card to open doors to classrooms. In the video frames, it was evident that the kidnapper was a woman matching the description in the photo on the pass. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a cap on her head. This could not have been the new employee, as the real Elaine San Augustine was in Hawaii at the time. The unknown woman, disguised in a white robe, entered several rooms as if searching for something. She was seen holding a list of students and their class times, including their shifts at Kaiser Hospital. All of this occurred on the eve of Michelle's disappearance. The detectives spent hours reviewing the footage until they noticed the woman early in the morning in the reception area. The recordings clearly showed her taking something from the table when the employee briefly left the office. As she started to leave, her face was captured on camera for just a few seconds. To the investigators' surprise, they recognized the face of Michelle's school friend, Giselle Esteban. Initially, the investigators suspected that Giselle had collaborated with her ex-boyfriend Scott to harm Michelle. However, before they could contact him, Marasigan himself called the police. On May 29th, while cleaning his car, Scott discovered a white phone under the backseat cover, which he believed belonged to Michelle Lee. The detectives considered the possibility that this might be another ploy by Scott to make it appear as though someone had framed him. Consequently, they hastened to meet with him and ask questions. Scott recounted a story that the detectives had already heard from Giselle. However, according to him, Giselle's jealousy towards Michelle was entirely unfounded. They had a platonic relationship at the very beginning of their acquaintance, which led nowhere. Due to Giselle's difficult character, Scott even attempted to gain full custody of his daughter, as the relationship with Giselle had become too toxic. She would create problems for herself and then blame everyone around her. Scott grew tired of enduring constant accusations against him, leading to their breakup. Giselle needed someone to blame for the breakup, and felt that her school friend Michelle was the perfect scapegoat. She genuinely believed that Michelle had destroyed their family. She became obsessed with this fantasy and began bombarding Scott with angry messages directed at their former friend. In recent months, Giselle's obsession with seeking revenge on her friend had intensified, and Scott had evidence to support this. He showed the detectives audio recordings of conversations with the mother of his child and text messages that were thoroughly imbued with malice and aggression towards both him and Michelle. He had collected this evidence when he sought full custody of his daughter, and now presented it to the officers to demonstrate Giselle's cruel nature. Even after the breakup, Scott occasionally met with Giselle, but it was impossible to stay with her for long. During any quarrel, the girl threatened to take her own life or skillfully manipulated their daughter. However, what irritated her the most was the fact that Michelle had been dating a new boyfriend, Tommy, for several years, and their relationship was quite serious. Michelle was completing her education at the nursing school and was directly pursuing her dream. She did not take the threatening messages addressed to her seriously, simply because she had no time for that. Giselle Esteban was summoned for questioning. The girl became so confused in her testimony that she inadvertently revealed that she had gone to Kaiser Hospital on the day of Michelle's disappearance. She claimed to have seen her from a distance, but did not approach her. After obtaining a search warrant for Giselle Esteban's apartment, the police were able to collect a sample of her DNA and also discovered blood spots on her shoes. It was later confirmed that the blood belonged to Michelle. Giselle was arrested on September 7, 2011, and charged with the murder of Michelle Lee, even though the girl's body had not yet been found at that time. Authorities asserted that there was sufficient evidence to proceed without a body. Giselle's phone was pinged in the same locations and at the same times as Michelle's phone, suggesting that Giselle had used her friend's car to dispose of her. She had intended to return the car to the parking lot, but noticed the instructor and the guard in the garage who were searching for the missing student. Consequently, she abandoned the car in one of the nearest parking lots. However, traces of Giselle's presence remained in the Honda's interior, including on the turn signal and her black hair on the driver's seat. On September 17th, one of the search dogs began to exhibit anxious behavior in the vicinity of another canyon. The dog ultimately led its owner to human remains. The body was so decomposed that it was impossible to immediately determine whether it belonged to a man or a woman. The forensic examination confirmed that it was the deceased Michelle Lee, but they were unable to ascertain the exact nature or cause of death. Giselle was formally charged on December 14, 2011, and she pleaded not guilty. The jury sentenced Giselle to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As a result of her actions, she left her 2 children without a mother, having removed her best friend from her path. The story today revolves around the mysterious vanishing of Courtney Holden, a 27-year-old Native American woman. In the U.S., Native American females face a risk of violence and harassment that is more than double that of any other demographic category. The majority of these assaults are perpetrated by individuals who are not Native Americans. Courtney was officially reported missing in 2019, but her actual disappearance occurred prior to that. She was last spotted approximately a year and a half before her official missing status. Those who were closest to Courtney maintain that she simply encountered a new romantic partner and departed with him, leaving everything behind, including her own child. However, was this truly what happened? Courtney Karina Holden entered the world on February 28, 1992. The circumstances that led her to a shelter remain a mystery. Akin to most youngsters, she harbored dreams of being adopted from an early age. However, her desire morphed into a nightmare. At the tender age of 4, she was placed with a foster family. Prior to that, the young girl had navigated various shelters until she found herself in the Holden couple's home in Spokane, Washington, where they were already nurturing several foster children. The Holdens also had 3 biological children, 2 grown daughters who resided separately in different states, and a son, Joshua, who lived permanently in the family abode, while all these foster children came and went. Courtney spent the majority of her life with the Holdens and was ultimately adopted by them. This implies that before the adoption, the responsibility for her well-being was divided between the guardianship authorities and the guardian. There is scant information about the girl's life itself, her interests, hobbies, or academic performance. However, one thing is evident: she resided in the Holden household for a considerable period. At the age of 20, Courtney found herself alone in the house with her adoptive mother, Judy, as Judy's husband had passed away by that point. Josh had departed temporarily. During this time, the young woman encountered a young man named Michael. She became pregnant, and they welcomed a baby boy. However, the couple soon parted ways. Michael did not obtain legal custody of the child. Their little son remained entirely under Courtney's care. The young parents attempted to officially share the responsibility of the baby so that the son could spend time with both parents. In 2019, Courtney was residing in her own house in Spokane with her adoptive mother, her 7-year-old child, and her adult brother, Josh, who had returned to the family residence by then. Her ex-boyfriend, Michael, had long since started a new relationship with a woman named Autumn Schatz, and it was this woman who initially raised concerns about Courtney Holden's disappearance. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. On October 5th, 2019, Autumn Schatz contacted the police and reported that she and Michael had not seen Courtney for the past year and a half and were currently unable to reach her as well. The young woman was deeply concerned that something might have transpired and requested a welfare check at the Holden residence. It appears that her call was not treated with urgency, as it is unusual to raise the alarm after such an extended period. Furthermore, Autumn was essentially a stranger to Courtney. The young woman had an adoptive family, and they had not filed any reports regarding her disappearance. The following day, October 6th, Michael, the child's father and Courtney's former partner, decided to call the police station himself to clarify the reasons for their concern. The man informed the authorities that despite the fact that the mother had full custody of his son, they had an arrangement for joint parenting of the boy. They had agreed on this many years prior, and Courtney always treated Michael's presence in their boy's life with great respect. She herself had lost her parents at a young age, so she did not wish to deprive her son of his father's attention. Courtney was an exceptional mom and prioritized her child's feelings above all else. Regrettably, it happened that Michael had not seen either Courtney or his son for the past 2 years. He explained that he had experienced a very challenging phase in his life. The battle with substance abuse compelled him to temporarily stop seeing his child, and as soon as he finally overcame his destructive addiction, another crisis emerged in his family. Now that everything had settled down and he felt he could properly care for his son again, the man attempted to contact him through his mother, but encountered unexpected difficulties. The truth is that Courtney had no social media accounts, no mobile phone, and not even her own vehicle. Michael and Autumn tried calling the Holden residence and even visited there, but they were turned away. No one could explain where Courtney and her son had gone. Judy did not even allow the child's father to enter the house and refused to call the boy. Michael was perplexed as to why Courtney herself did not come out and clarify the situation, because even if something had changed in their relationship, he should have been the first to know. On October 8th, 2 days later, the authorities finally arrived at the Holden's residence to ascertain why Courtney was not in contact and if everything was all right with her son. However, the patrol officers also encountered a wall of misunderstanding. The Holdens were completely unwilling to cooperate from the very beginning. They refused to allow the police to enter the house. When asked to come out for a conversation, they reluctantly answered the questions posed. Their behavior alone raised concerns. Eventually, Judy and her son Josh explained that Courtney had been in the house just a few days prior, after which she departed with her new boyfriend, taking the child. The Holdens could not say precisely where Courtney had gone. Moreover, they could not even name the man, claiming that she just got up and left without providing a proper explanation. For some reason, the relatives were certain that the young woman and her son were fine. The police immediately sensed that something was amiss and asked to write down Judy's phone number so they could contact her if necessary. The woman reluctantly agreed, went into the house to get paper and pen, but closed the door and locked it behind her. The authorities, alarmed by such behavior, immediately declared Courtney Holden and her son missing. Despite the fact that Josh and Judy claimed that the mother and child were safe, a minor was involved in the case. The police needed to see the boy and inform his father that the child was secure. Almost immediately after the young mother and her son were declared missing, the police received another disturbing phone call. The woman on the other end of the line identified herself as Courtney Holden. She explained to the dispatcher that she was completely safe. Her son was with her, so she asked to stop the search and not interfere in their lives. The caller categorically refused to come to the station and meet in person, blaming it on being very busy, and then disconnected altogether. It would seem that this was the best possible outcome of the case at the moment. The missing persons were found, but the police found something suspicious about this call. Therefore, the disappearance case was transferred to a detective from the Department for the Investigation of Serious Crimes, and he immediately developed a flurry of activity to clarify the details. The officer began to reach out to all of Courtney's acquaintances to establish a more accurate date when she was last seen. Perhaps the woman told someone else where she was going to go with her son. But all these conversations only brought a terrible reality to the forefront. The detectives managed to contact Courtney's biological brother Ruben and his girlfriend. They both confirmed what Autumn Schatz had said. It had been at least a year and a half since their last meeting with their sister. According to Ruben, Judy and Josh gave them the same arguments as they did to the police, stating that Courtney had run away with her new boyfriend. There was only one significant difference. The young woman did not take her son with her, leaving the boy in the care of her adoptive mother and brother. And this was verified information because Ruben and his girlfriend had been to the Holdens' house many times since then to visit their nephew. The boy had indeed been living under the care of his grandmother and uncle all this time. However, these visits were more than strange. Ruben's girlfriend was also named Courtney. When they came to the Holden residence, Joshua asked her to use a different name, reasoning that the boy would be upset when he heard his mother's name. But what is even more peculiar is that the child called Judy Mom and Josh Dad. The Holdens themselves addressed Courtney's son by name, but it was not the name that his real mother had given him. In addition to Ruben, the detectives also spoke with other acquaintances and close relatives of the Holden family. None of what other people said fit into a clear picture. Everyone had their own story about the young woman and her son. What the Holdens told the police was completely different from what they told other people. Judy informed the patrol officers that Courtney, together with her son, had only recently left the house, having departed just a few days ago. However, other witnesses insisted that they had not seen the young woman for at least a year. It was all very suspicious. On October 10th, the authorities went to the Holden house again, and this time wanted to look inside. However, they were met with undisguised irritation and resistance. It was quite evident that Judy and Josh still did not want to cooperate. Josh didn't even tell the law enforcement officers that he was aware of Courtney's call to the police station. The man genuinely did not understand why they continued to search for his adoptive sister if she had made herself known. In the end, Judy relented and agreed to let the detectives inside so they could inspect Courtney's room. The elderly woman vigilantly watched to ensure that the police did not wander around the house or look into other rooms. At one point, one of the officers disappeared from the hostess's field of vision, standing behind a closed door. Judy literally went berserk. It seemed to her that the detective had entered another room without her knowledge. There was fear in her eyes, although she tried to hide it behind a mask of indignation. The investigators wondered what they could find that Judy Holden was worried about. Courtney's room did indeed look abandoned. All sorts of unnecessary junk was piled up there, and it seemed that the room had not been used for a very long time. There were no sheets or pillows on the bed, just a bare mattress, and there was a layer of dust everywhere on the surface of the furniture. So the claim that the young woman had left this room just a few days ago did not correspond to reality. In addition, there were many clothes left in the closet. It was unclear why Courtney had not taken them with her if she had decided to move to another place. After inspecting the missing woman's bedroom, the officers wanted to take a look at the nursery where her son lived, and this time, Judy could no longer conceal her fear. She started screaming, referring to the violation of her rights, and simply kicked the police out of the house. Something was clearly happening in the Holden residence, and the authorities intended to find out what exactly. Over the next few weeks, detectives interviewed various people who could provide any clues as to the exact time of Courtney's disappearance. Everyone the police talked to, including the missing woman's relatives, other members of the Holden family, and close neighbors painted a truly grim picture. Investigators were unable to find a single person, with the exception of Judy and Joshua, who had seen Courtney in the last 18 months. It turned out that the life the young woman led in the Holden residence was a real nightmare. According to neighbors, the events taking place behind the closed doors of this house had been causing alarm for many years. The center of all these concerns was Joshua. People who lived nearby, and even relatives, described him as a cruel, unbalanced, unpredictable, and dangerous person. He had a very short temper. He absolutely could not control it. Acquaintances insisted that everything was so bad that even Josh's own mother, Judy, was afraid of these manifestations of aggression, and his criminal past confirmed all these fears and concerns. Josh's history was quite extensive, including things like domestic violence, burglary, unlawful restraint, and intimate violence. He had real charges brought against him back in 2005. However, because the victim was terrified and refused to cooperate with the investigation, and also due to the lack of direct evidence, the charges were eventually dropped. At one point, Joshua publicly boasted that he could easily take a person's life and easily dispose of the body. Even if this phrase is far from reality, it can say a lot about the personality of the person who said it. Josh left home for a while, and Courtney finally gained her long-awaited freedom and was able to breathe a sigh of relief. That's when she met Michael and became pregnant by him. But just a couple of years after the birth of her son, Joshua returned to the Holden house. According to neighbors, the situation began to change for the worse. Josh immediately installed surveillance cameras throughout the house, and after that, Courtney and her son practically stopped going outside. On those rare occasions when someone living nearby saw her in the backyard, the young woman was usually doing some housework. Neighbors tried to talk to her over the fence, and Courtney complained to them that her brother was raising his hand against her while demonstrating bruises all over her body. Usually, these conversations did not last long because Joshua would run out into the street and start yelling at his sister. After he caught Courtney chatting with neighbors several times, she and her son were forbidden to go outside during daylight hours, and even at night, Joshua's screams often rang out, insisting that his sister return inside. Somehow, Courtney still managed to get close to one neighbor and obtain an old cell phone. Thanks to this, the young woman could safely call at night because everyone else in the house was asleep. Since she had virtually no opportunity to communicate with anyone, she often called the neighbor in tears and told her how unhappy she was and wanted to get out of there. Courtney was practically a prisoner in the home of her adoptive parents. She was too scared to run away because there were cameras everywhere watching her every move. Moreover, she could not disappear, leaving her young son behind. Many people noticed what was happening in the Holden house, but none of them even thought to report it to the police. All the neighbors saw the plight of Judy's adopted daughter, but no one lifted a finger until she disappeared. Human indifference is sometimes striking. Now that Courtney is gone, so many people have stated that they wish they could have done more for her. Neighbors regretted that they tried to intervene and somehow help the girl. According to numerous witnesses, Josh and Judy never called Courtney by her name. Although they adopted her at a young age and the girl lived with them into adulthood, they called her Cindy, short for Cinderella. This directly corresponded to how they treated her. All she did every day was housework. The situation in the Holden residence became complicated around the time when Michael, the father of Courtney's son, stopped coming over, having become involved in the use of illegal substances. The woman was left alone with her problems in a family where she was treated like a servant. All this led to a horrific altercation between Courtney and the Holdens in July 2018, witnessed by a neighbor. This person claimed that one fine day, Courtney burst out of the doors of the house where she lived, dragging a sports bag behind her. Judy was chasing after her, shouting for her to come back immediately. Courtney snapped at her adoptive mother and said that she was not going to stay there for another second. She had had enough. She was struggling to drag the heavy bag and continued to move away, but then Joshua appeared on the porch. He was 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed over 290 pounds. He instantly caught up with his sister, picked her up in his arms, and carried her back into the house along with the bag. The doors closed, and no one saw Courtney again. When neighbors asked the Holdens where their adopted daughter had gone, they were all told different things. Some were told that she had run away that very night, others that she had left with her new boyfriend, and still others were told that Courtney was safe and sound at home. Judy gave various reasons why her daughter could not come out. Her main goal was to convince the neighbors that the girl was okay, so that they would stop asking further questions. But after that incident, Courtney never appeared in the backyard again, neither during the day nor at night. However, on that same July night, one neighbor saw Josh digging behind the house. When Holden was asked what he was doing at such a time, he calmly stated that he was making a playground for his nephew. The legitimate question arose as to why he was doing this in the dark of night. Courtney vanished. She was no longer seen after the escape attempt, and according to eyewitnesses, her young son lived in the Holden house all this time. Thus, the police were able to establish an approximate time of disappearance. They were able to confirm it through medical records. The girl was taking prescription drugs. She would get a prescription from the doctor every month and go to the pharmacy to replenish her supply of pills. The last time this happened was in July 2018. She was no longer seen at the pharmacy after that. She had been taking medication for quite a long time and always strictly followed the doctor's instructions. But in August, Courtney's prescription remained unfilled. As witnesses, the police found other foster children who had been raised in the Holden home. One of them was a young man named Jensen. For some time, he and his biological brother were taken into the care of Judy. Despite the fact that the guy was already an adult, he still shuddered when talking about the horrors that took place in this family. He lived there from infancy until the age of 12. Every day, he and his brother were in fear of who would become the punching bag that day. Joshua constantly chose a victim and bullied them all day long. Courtney also lived in the Holden house at that time, and she got no less than the boys did. According to Jensen, it was terrible to experience constant beatings, but seeing new children come and also fall into the hands of this villain Joshua was much worse than experiencing it himself. They lived in a real hell. It is unknown how it would have ended, but eventually, Jensen's brother got tired of this life and grabbed a knife. He could have cut one of the Holden family members, and after that, their older sister took them in. If Jensen's brother had not gotten tired of the way Josh treated him and had not lost his composure, they themselves might no longer be alive. As soon as the brothers left this terrible house, all of Joshua's anger switched to Courtney. Now Jensen was 100% sure that their friend in misfortune was no longer alive. He did not doubt for a minute that she would not have run away, leaving her son in the care of Judy and Josh, because anyone who lived in that house would never leave their child with these monsters. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. Jensen believed that initially, the Holdens took children into their family only to get assistance from the state. They needed money, and then it all grew into physical abuse by Josh. The authorities, to be honest, were shocked by the avalanche of information that hit them. At that moment, they firmly felt that the Holdens were concealing something. The biggest problem was Courtney's son. Over the past year and a half, many people had seen the boy in the company of Judy and Josh, but the Holdens themselves, for some reason, denied that the child was in the house. The last time a neighbor saw him with them was on October 10th, the day the police came to check Courtney's room. It was no wonder Judy got nervous when they asked her permission to see the nursery. The hostess did not allow them to rummage through her house. After that, she tried to show the law enforcement officers the door, hinting at the absence of a warrant. When detectives began to study other aspects of Courtney's life in detail to sort out this case, they caught Judy and Josh red-handed. Despite the fact that the young woman had not been seen since July 2018, her bank account was active, and funds were regularly withdrawn from it, including the withdrawal of $600 on the day she was declared missing. The police decided to check the surveillance cameras at the ATM to see who was withdrawing the money. It was possible that it was Courtney herself, and then the case would have taken a completely different turn. But instead, they saw the mother and son Holdens withdrawing money from an account that did not belong to them. Courtney also had food stamps for herself and her son. Although the woman had already been declared missing, someone was using the stamps. Surveillance camera footage confirmed that it was again Judy and Joshua. In addition to the fact that the mother and son Holdens were evasive towards the detectives, they calmly spent money from bank accounts and bought food at the expense of the missing Courtney's stamps between July 2018 and October 2019. On October 24th, the police obtained a search warrant for the Holden house. The officers were already ready for anything. They hoped to find Courtney's son as soon as possible and hand him over to his father, and then find out where the child's mother had gone. However, when the patrol car drove up to the house of Judy and Joshua, they were gone without a trace. The elderly mother, adult son, and 7-year-old boy simply fled the house, taking 6 animals with them. It did not seem that they were preparing to move. Most likely they took the bare necessities and urgently left the house. Along with this, they took a video recorder that stored the history of recorded video files. The police continued to search the house, trying to find anything that could lead them to Courtney, Judy, or Josh. They discovered several things that heightened concern for the young woman. It was Courtney's ID, as well as her personal diary, a notebook where the unfortunate woman recorded all her experiences. It could give them some idea of what she had to endure. They also found 18 cell phones, several computers, and handwritten notes about blackmailing several people in the house. A team of dog handlers with sniffer dogs trained to find human remains walked through the area. The dogs behaved calmly and did not find anything of interest to the investigation. The likelihood that the woman could have escaped leaving her child behind decreased with each passing day. Unfortunately, there was also no evidence that Courtney Holden was currently alive. The police threw all their efforts into searching for the fugitives Judy and Joshua, but how did it happen that they illegally took Courtney's son with them? The detectives were able to discover that the fugitives got rid of their old SIM cards and acquired new phone numbers with a Texas code. However, this also did not bring them closer to the answers. A month later, at the end of November 2019, vigilant neighbors called the police and reported that someone was in the Holden house. When the patrol car arrived at the residence of Judy and Josh, the owners themselves were not there. Inside was one of Judy's daughters with her husband. The couple flew in from Texas to check on the house. In a conversation with the police, they told conflicting stories about the whereabouts of Courtney's son. Judy's daughter insisted that the child had gone with Courtney, while her husband reported that the boy had come to Texas with Judy and Joshua. The daughter explained to the detectives that her mother was retired, so she decided to travel around the country with her son and grandson. It turned out that all 3 of them, since the boy was still with them, unexpectedly appeared at her son-in-law's house in Texas on November 26th. Judy ordered her daughter to immediately go to Washington State to check on the family home. The influence of Judy and Joshua on their older daughters was evident. The mother and brother made the women say and do everything they needed. A little later, the police contacted another of the Holden daughters and also learned something interesting. It turned out that the phone call to the police department, allegedly on behalf of the missing person, was made by the second daughter. It was she who, on the orders of her mother, called, introduced herself as Courtney, and said that she was all right and did not need to be looked for. In December 2019, the police tracked down the Holdens in Plano, Texas. They were living in the house of their eldest daughter while she and her husband flew to Washington. The boy, Courtney's son, was indeed with them. The child was immediately taken into custody and later transferred to the care of his biological father, where he remains to this day. On December 19th, both the mother and son were arrested. They were charged with identity theft and kidnapping of Courtney's son. At that time, they were not charged with anything regarding the disappearance of the young woman. Judy and Joshua were questioned about what might have happened to her, pointing out the numerous inconsistencies and lies in their statements. But they both claimed their innocence and refused to talk, insisting that they had nothing to do with her disappearance. The Holdens stuck to their version that she had run away with a new boyfriend. Judy and Joshua did not agree to be extradited back to Spokane. They knew that if they returned, they could face serious charges related to Courtney's disappearance. The Holdens even hired a lawyer who fought for their release, citing Judy's age. She was about 75 years old at the time, and the health of 40-year-old Josh, who allegedly had a suspicion of a brain tumor and mental disorders. They remained in a Texas prison, where they refused any communication with detectives. The defense attorney repeatedly stated that the boy, Courtney's son, was safe and sound, and that accusing the Holdens of taking care of the child while his mother was somewhere arranging her personal life was pointless, as it was not a crime. The lawyer advocated for their release. In fact, he laid the blame on the shoulders of the missing Courtney, saying that she was a mother who had abandoned her child to her elderly mother and sick brother. Moreover, the defense attorney was sure that the young woman was alive and well, and even intended to find her himself to help prove his client's right. Unfortunately, his words remained empty air, shaking in an attempt to sway justice to his side. It was discovered that from the state of Washington, the Holdens traveled to an RV park in Oklahoma, where they registered under false names. They spent the entire month of November there before heading to the home of one of Judy's daughters. Later, the police searched the car and trailer belonging to the Holdens but found nothing there that would assist the investigation. Judy and Joshua behaved suspiciously, lied to the police several times, fled the state, registered in a trailer park under false names, changed phone numbers, and for some reason took the video recorder from the house. What else did they need to do to raise police suspicion against them? Ultimately, both the mother and son were released from federal custody due to the pandemic, considering the crimes they committed not to be so serious. In 2021, they both pleaded guilty. Joshua Holden agreed with the charges of identity theft and second-degree kidnapping of Courtney's son. He was sentenced to 135 days in prison, with credit for time already served. Judy Holden also pleaded guilty to illegally taking her grandson away without warning anyone. Judy and Josh are currently at liberty. They have served their sentences for the crimes for which they were found guilty. Due to lack of evidence, neither of them was charged with the actual disappearance of Courtney. The question of where the young woman is now and what happened to her in the house of her adoptive family still remains unanswered. Authorities have stated that the case has reached a dead end at the moment. They have appealed to the public with numerous requests to provide any information about the disappearance of Courtney Holden. However, no reliable information about her fate has been received. Law enforcement agencies have made every effort to sort out this case. They interviewed dozens of people, searched the house and the territory with the involvement of service dogs, and traced the entire path of the fugitives to Texas. But the case did not progress from its point. Everyone who knew the girl, including the police, believed that she was no longer alive. No arrests have been made in connection with her disappearance. Unfortunately, Courtney's case remains unsolved. Virtue doesn't always don the guise of wickedness, yet frequently malevolence, cloaked in the semblance of righteousness, perpetrates its deranged acts. Ought we to have faith in those who surround us? Let's journey back 4 decades to the dawn of 1984, to the quaint borough of Falls, nestled in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. This is where young Terri Brooks, a mere 5 years old, resided. Terri Lynn entered the world on September 13, 1958, born to George and Frances. She was the firstborn among 4 siblings. During Terri's adolescent years, her parents parted ways. It was an arduous period for the entire household, particularly for the youngsters. They had to acclimate to novel transformations in their lives, and the eldest daughter had to assume the role of a guide for her brothers and sisters. Terri was portrayed as an exceptionally joyful, exuberant, and outgoing young lady. She formed friendships effortlessly and possessed the ability to interact with others effectively. Upon completing high school, Terri pursued higher education and concurrently commenced employment as a server to assist her family in some capacity. It was this very occupation that ultimately became Terri's passion. The student resolved that she aspired to further her career in the culinary and dining sector. After serving as a waitress for a period, the young woman was able to showcase her finest attributes and secure a managerial role for herself. Her affability and loquaciousness were ideally suited for customer service, while her diligence and tenacity enabled her to oversee others and coordinate the operations of the entire establishment. A young man named Alfred Scott Keefe was employed as a chef in this eatery, and he and Terri developed a strong affection for one another. A romance quickly blossomed between them, culminating in an engagement. For Terri's loved ones, this was quite an unexpected development, but they concluded that if Terri was content, they would rejoice for her as well. The couple was deeply enamored with each other and envisioned spending the remainder of their lives together. They intended to wed in the summer of 1984. Terri was immensely thrilled about the forthcoming occasion. She eagerly anticipated shopping for bridal gowns and selecting attire for herself and her bridesmaids. Brooks' professional life was also progressing. The young woman secured a new position as a night supervisor at Roy Rogers' restaurant. Employees regarded her as an equitable and upright manager. If they devoted themselves wholeheartedly to their work and adhered to the established rules, there were no issues. But Terri didn't hesitate to deal firmly with indolent and undependable staff members. She could assert her authority. This was the responsibility of a manager. Terri had grown accustomed to working night shifts at the restaurant, and it had become a part of her regular routine. But on the evening of February 4th, 1984, something went awry, because for some inexplicable reason, she never returned home this time. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Despite the fact that Terri and Scott were engaged, they maintained separate residences. The following morning, as Scott was driving by his fiancee's abode, he observed that her vehicle was absent from the driveway adjacent to the house. This struck him as peculiar, so he halted, exited his car, knocked on the door, and inquired with his future father-in-law about Terri's whereabouts. In tandem with George, they inspected the young woman's bedroom and deduced that she had not returned home the previous night. The distressed father seized the phone and contacted the Roy Rogers restaurant to ascertain if she was unharmed. However, the individual on the other end of the line corroborated the gravest apprehensions. Terri had vanished. She had departed from this world eternally. Around 6 a.m., one of the daytime supervisors of the same establishment arrived at work and made an utterly horrifying revelation. Upon entering the restaurant's kitchen, he stumbled upon the lifeless form of Terri Brooks. The young woman was sprawled in a pool of her own blood on the floor, with an enormous meat knife protruding from her neck, and her body was riddled with defensive wounds and contusions. Terri had been viciously assaulted and slain right at her place of employment. As soon as the manager discovered the body, he promptly dialed 911, and when George Brooks phoned the restaurant to inquire about his daughter's whereabouts, a law enforcement officer answered him and conveyed the tragic tidings. An autopsy was performed subsequently. The pathologist ascertained that the official cause of Terri's demise was likely strangulation. She had ceased breathing in a garbage bag placed over her head. Apparently, there was a vicious struggle between the young woman and the assailant, hence all the bruises. She also sustained a stab wound to the neck that only paralyzed her. She could no longer resist. Moreover, Terri was struck on the head multiple times against the concrete floor of the kitchen, which resulted in a cerebral hemorrhage. But even after all these dreadful injuries, the young woman was still alive. Perhaps she was lying unconscious when a plastic garbage bag was pulled over her head and fastened around Terri's head. Terri was still respiring when this occurred, as there was moisture inside the bag. Also at the scene, law enforcement noticed that Brooks's shoes were lying on the kitchen floor not far from where the body was. It was surmised that this is where the attack commenced. The young woman herself was wearing a winter coat. Therefore, everything transpired when she exited the restaurant in the evening to go home, approximately after midnight when the restaurant closed. There were no indications of breaking and entering, suggesting that Terri let the criminals in herself when she was departing through the front door. The police swiftly concluded that the night manager's death was most likely part of a robbery attempt. Approximately $2,500 was stolen from the safe in the office. Brooks's purse lying nearby was also emptied. Items were shaken out directly onto the floor, and the money was taken. Perhaps Terri knew the attacker, or saw his face. Consequently, she was killed so that she would not alert the authorities and would be unable to identify the perpetrator. There was a spare exit in the restaurant that was closed for the night, but in the morning the manager and the police discovered that the window on the doors was shattered from the inside. Most likely, this is how the offender vacated the premises. Following the police, forensic experts arrived at the scene. They scrutinized the kitchen and restaurant hall for fingerprints and collected skin and hair samples from the body of the deceased, particularly from under her nails, to search for the perpetrator's DNA. However, all these events transpired in the mid-'80s, when comparative DNA analysis and forensic technologies were still in their nascent stages. Such evidence was not genuinely suitable for establishing the identity of the assailant. Nevertheless, the investigation into Terri Brooks's death commenced. The police interrogated and examined individuals connected to the deceased. Naturally, one of the first people they focused on was her fiancé, Scott Keefe. When questioned about his whereabouts the previous night, the man responded that he was sleeping at home. Typically, Scott would meet his fiancée after her shift so that she wouldn't have to collect the revenue and close the restaurant building alone. But on that fateful evening, he had unfortunately retired early because he had an early shift the next morning. The guy felt remorseful about this. After all, if he had met Terri, she would be alive. This was the sole occasion he wasn't there, and his future wife desperately needed protection. In addition to conversing with Scott, the police also spoke with other close ones, who all unanimously stated that Terri did not and could not have enemies, as she was a kind and amiable person. But when investigators delved deeper into Terri's work activities and questioned her colleagues from the restaurant, new figures emerged in the case. Terri's subordinates mentioned one conflict in the workplace and named a guy who had a strong aversion to the girl. His name was Steve Daly. Steve formerly worked at the Roy Rogers restaurant as a chef, but due to his quick temper, the young man often lost his composure and caused a great deal of trouble for his colleagues. He obstinately refused to accept Terri as his boss and rejected all the rules she established. Because of him, the atmosphere in the team was unpleasant, which often affected the service of restaurant patrons. Terri was not going to disregard his attacks. Because Steve was creating problems in the workplace, the manager often confronted him about his behavior, but this only led to numerous arguments. During one of them, Daly even referred to Terri as a bitch. Therefore, ultimately he was terminated just a couple of weeks before the girl was brutally attacked. However, after that, Steve still visited the restaurant, ordered food, and tried in every possible way to anger Terri, and even intimidate her. After conversing with the restaurant employees, the police had a serious contender for the role of the criminal. Most importantly, he had a compelling motive. Because of Terri, the guy lost his job. Maybe it was an act of revenge. Steve was summoned for questioning at the police station. He did not conceal the fact that he was genuinely furious with Terri. He absolutely disliked her. If she hadn't been a woman, he would have hit her once. However, the guy denied that he had dealt with his former boss. On the night of the incident, Daly tried to gain entry to a nightclub, but he was denied access. The police could not verify his story as they did not find any witnesses. It turned out that Steve did not have a sufficiently convincing alibi to be excluded from the list of suspects. Investigators asked the young man to take a polygraph test. He easily passed the lie detector test, which indicated to the police that he was being truthful. The police temporarily backed off from the guy, but in any case, they kept an eye on him. The police continued to check other employees of the Roy Rogers restaurant who were of interest to the investigation. In particular, they were interested in people who worked the same shift with Terri, and another suspect emerged. His fingerprint matched one of those found on the garbage bag placed over Terri's head, as well as on the window of the back door, from where the criminal allegedly fled. However, the employee had a logical explanation for why his prints were at the place where he worked. His responsibilities included collecting all the garbage in the evening, taking it out, and inserting a new bag into the bucket. So it's not surprising that his fingers left prints there. Unfortunately, there was no other evidence of this person's involvement in the attack. Moreover, the employees had a plausible alibi for that evening. All individuals somehow close to Terri were thoroughly checked and excluded from the list of suspects. Now, the police had a theory of an attack by a stranger with the aim of stealing funds from the establishment's cash register. Robberies of restaurants at that time were quite frequent in the surrounding areas. Of course, it did not come to the point of killing employees, but there were exceptions. About 2 weeks after Terri's death, another very similar attack occurred in another Roy Rogers restaurant. The assistant manager was leaving the establishment's restroom when someone assaulted him from behind, hit him on the head, and fled the scene. Nothing was stolen, and the police wondered if these two cases were connected. Fortunately, the assistant manager survived the attack, but the perpetrator was never found. A few days after that, there was another attack on a food service worker. This case occurred at an establishment in the city of Scranton, about 130 miles from Roy Rogers. In February 1984, a young woman named Kathy Hunchak was preparing to close the cafe in the evening. She had no idea that outside in the dark stood a man observing her actions. He was waiting for all the other employees to go home and for Kathy to be alone. This man intended to steal money from the cash registers. He did not take into account that all the revenue had already been put in the safe, and the girl did not have access to it. Instead of just leaving, the man took the cash from Kathy's wallet, and after that, he took the girl's life by stabbing her several times. Since the attack on Kathy occurred literally a couple of weeks after the death of Terri Brooks, detectives suspected that these cases could be related to each other because there were numerous similarities between them. Soon, the Scranton police made an arrest in the Kathy Hunchak case. The assailant turned out to be another cafe employee who decided to profit from his own workplace. As a result of further proceedings, this individual received a death sentence. After his arrest, he was interrogated by detectives leading the Terri Brooks case, but the man refused to talk to them at all and answer any questions. They still managed to obtain his fingerprints and compare them with those found at the crime scene, but none of the prints matched. The investigation reached an impasse. The police studied countless potential suspects, tracked down various leads, trying to link Terri's case to other incidents, but they simply suffered failure after failure. The detectives were never able to identify the person who committed this heinous crime. In the coming months, the case of the brutal attack on the night manager of the restaurant was placed on the shelf with unsolved cases. Gradually, it began to be forgotten due to the influx of new incidents that needed to be investigated. Terri Brooks died in her prime, and her killer was calmly walking free. For almost a decade and a half, there were no developments in Terri's case. Her grieving family was left without answers and without justice, which simply shattered their hearts. The year 1998 arrived, and a small glimmer of hope appeared in Terri's case. The Falls Police Department decided to retrieve their old unsolved cases from the archive and recheck some data using advancements in DNA and forensic technologies that had emerged over the years. One of these cases turned out to be the attack on Terri Brooks in 1984. All the evidence in this case was seized from storage and sent for forensic examination. This included the kitchen knife that was found protruding from the girl's neck and DNA samples taken from her body shortly after the discovery. Meanwhile, while all this evidence was being reanalyzed in the lab, new detectives who were assigned to the case began to recheck all the individuals who were in Terri's circle of communication. Her family, friends, colleagues, all underwent repeated interrogations in the hope that they would remember something important that they did not report in the mid-'80s. This was done in case someone she knew actually attacked her. The injuries inflicted on the girl indicated this. According to the police, they were too personal in nature and were incredibly vicious. The attacker was clearly enraged with Terri. They also suggested that the person who took the girl's life that night had a much stronger motive than just stealing cash from the safe, and there was indeed a breakthrough in the case. When the new detectives spoke with Terri's former supervisor, they presented him with photos from the crime scene. He had not seen them before, as he was not shown the pictures during the initial investigation, and now he noticed several details that shattered the previous theory into pieces. It was a photograph from Terri's office. At the end of the work shift, the girl would arrange items on the table in a strictly established order. She would empty the ashtray and put all the stationery in the desk drawer. She was a very neat and organized individual. However, in the picture of the office taken that night, everything was different. The stationery was lying on the table, the ashtray was full, and the phone was not in its usual place. This information immediately caught the attention of the detectives. Previously, it was believed that the criminal attacked Terri when she was leaving the restaurant, but according to the testimony of the former supervisor, it turned out to be the opposite. She had not yet left the premises when she was attacked, since she had not completed her usual tasks. The disarray on the desk indicated that she indeed knew the attacker and let him into the restaurant that night. Consequently, this person was close enough to Terri that she was not afraid to stay with him alone in the building at night. That is why the police continued to investigate the close individuals in Terri's life. As part of this investigation, the detectives decided to speak with the girl's old friends, with whom the police for some reason did not talk during the first investigation in 1984. After these conversations, a new suspect suddenly emerged in the case, someone who had actually been in plain sight all these years. It turned out that shortly before her death, Terri confided in a friend that her relationship with her fiancé, Scott Keefe, was on the verge of breaking up. She was no longer certain if she truly wanted to marry him. Terri and Scott were not well acquainted when they announced their engagement. Initially, the girl was on cloud 9 with happiness and could not wait for the wedding, but this happiness was short-lived because soon cracks began to appear in the relationship. Terri was quite ambitious and made every effort to climb the career ladder in the field of restaurant management. She was doing well at it. In contrast, Scott was the complete opposite. He was dissatisfied with his job as a chef in another restaurant, but he lacked the enthusiasm and motivation like Terri to pursue his dreams, and this made the guy very angry. In addition to everything, Scott was possessive and liked to control his fiancée. He needed to know where she was going, what she was doing, and who she was meeting with. That is why he would meet Terri every time after her night shift at the Roy Rogers restaurant. It was not at all for the girl's safety. The man was checking to see if there was anyone next to her. Obviously, she reached the point where she was tired of Scott's unfounded jealousy, his controlling and abusive behavior. She confessed to her friend that she was unsure if she wanted to go through with the wedding and be with Scott. This was completely new information for the police. In the old case files from 1984, there was nothing that would indicate these problems in their relationship because not everyone knew about it. The detectives leading the Brooks case thought of Scott as a loving and caring fiancé who adored Terri. Her family also really liked Keefe. At least that was the impression the police got. So neither the family of the deceased nor the police suspected the young man of anything. But now that new details of the case had come to light, Scott Keefe was first on the list. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. All this time, Keefe had been right in front of their eyes. Perhaps Terri told her fiancé about her doubts regarding the upcoming wedding, and he decided that if he couldn't have the girl himself, then she wouldn't belong to anyone. The problem was that the police currently had no solid evidence against Keefe to make an arrest. Fortunately, the answer came from the DNA samples taken from under Terri's fingernails when she was trying to protect her life. The DNA belonged to an unknown man who, according to the police, committed the brutal attack. The same unknown DNA profile was found on the knife sticking out of the girl's neck when she was discovered. Experts had to literally take the weapon apart. They removed the blade from the wooden handle and found particles belonging to the criminal underneath it. Now the police only had to compare the DNA of all the suspects with the obtained sample. And of course, the very first person they wanted to check was Scott Keefe. But if they asked him to provide a sample, the man could panic and go on the run. They didn't have enough evidence to arrest him, so they decided to obtain the DNA without his knowledge. At that time, Scott was still living with his parents. He had managed to get married, have a child, and get divorced again, returning to the family home. Scott was a heavy smoker. The detectives only had to find a cigarette butt, compare the DNA from the saliva, and identify a match. The police set up surveillance on Scott's house, and as soon as one of the owners took out the trash, they grabbed the bag and took it to the lab. Inside were cigarette butts that matched the DNA of the perpetrator. Now the police had solid evidence linking Scott Keefe to the brutal death of his fiancée. The man was taken to the police station for questioning but was not informed of the evidence found. His story about the events of that night was no different from the story of 1984. Therefore, he was offered to take a polygraph test, which he eventually failed. Only after that, a DNA sample was officially taken from him for analysis, confirming the detective's version of Scott's involvement in the death of his fiancée. Even before waiting for the test results, Keefe panicked and began to say strange things. Supposedly, he did not want it to happen and that she attacked him first. Apparently, his nerves were on edge. For 14 years, he lived in fear that the truth would one day come out. And now, when he realized that he was caught, his brain began to produce defensive phrases. When Scott realized that he had compromised himself, he tried to twist his words, but further police questioning forced him to confess to what he had done. When the man realized that his time was up and the police had evidence against him, he admitted what happened on that tragic night. On February 4th, 1984, after midnight, Scott went to the Roy Rogers restaurant where Terri was finishing her evening shift. Other employees of the establishment had already gone home, so no one saw him. The girl let her fiancé in while she was counting the revenue herself. Inside the restaurant, an argument erupted between them because Terri told Scott that she had canceled the wedding and no longer wanted to be with him. She did not like his possessive and domineering character, as well as his constant jealousy. This angered the guy so much that he hit the girl right in the face, after which rage completely consumed him. Terri tried to push him away and drive him out. A fierce struggle ensued between them in the kitchen. Keefe managed to knock his fiancée to the floor. He grabbed her by the shoulders and began hitting her head against the concrete floor, then wrapped his arms around her neck and squeezed with all his might. It is impossible to imagine what Terri felt at that moment when her once beloved person turned into an evil monster in a second, and as if in a test of strength, one of the knives fell from a chair next to them. The girl reached out, but Scott was faster. He grabbed the cold weapon and plunged it into his fiancée's neck. However, even after all these injuries, Terri was alive. The blow to the neck paralyzed her, completely depriving her of the ability to defend herself. Keefe realized that there was no turning back, so he pulled out an empty bag from the trash can in the kitchen and wrapped it around Terri's head. Then he tried to cover his tracks, deciding to stage a banal robbery. He took $2,500 from the office and got out of the restaurant through the back door window, and in the morning, he pretended to be a worried fiancé and managed to escape justice. But all these years, he could not forget Terri's eyes begging him for mercy. In February 1999, Scott Keefe was arrested on suspicion of killing Terri Brooks. This happened on the 15th anniversary of her death. He fully admitted his guilt, and in 2000 was sentenced to life imprisonment. After a decade and a half, Terri's family received the answers and closure that they had been waiting for so long. But it was a shock for them to learn that it was Scott, who was always considered a good and sincere guy, who took the life of their Terri. Fate is a predetermined course of life bestowed upon an individual prior to their birth. However, is it possible for an error to occur within the system, resulting in a physical body devoid of a soul? The tale we'll explore today revolves around an individual whose existence has been utterly meaningless since the beginning of his life. Canada is a remarkable nation known for its unspoiled landscapes, breathtaking scenery, exceptional quality of life, and numerous other benefits. It is the world's second-largest country by land area, surpassed only by Russia. Canada boasts one of the most well-educated populations globally, with over half of its citizens possessing higher education qualifications. The Canadian penal system also has its unique features. In the village of Churchill, situated on a former military installation, there is an extraordinary facility, a prison designed for polar bears that threaten human safety. In the past, these animals were simply killed, but now aggressive bears are confined to cells for several days to instill a sense of caution when approaching the village. Life imprisonment is the harshest penalty in Canada, but even the most notorious offenders can request parole after serving 25 years in prison. Today's narrative centers around an individual who has served one of the lengthiest sentences in Canada. His name is Jack Bender. This man has been incarcerated since 1973 for a particularly heinous offense, yet few individuals are aware of his story. Naturally, apart from him, there are inmates in Canada who will likely never be freed because they will simply resume their criminal activities upon release. These are true predators who have perpetrated a series of vicious crimes. Among them are internationally recognized names. The victims of these criminals were counted in the dozens, and their trials sparked immense public outrage. Nevertheless, Jack Bender cannot be categorized alongside these psychopaths. Although Jack was also given a life sentence, it was highly uncharacteristic of the Canadian Parole Board to keep someone imprisoned for such an extended period, even those who had taken the life of another. So what did this man do that led to prison becoming his permanent residence? Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Jack Bender was born on October 26, 1951, and his upbringing was far from ideal. Jack's father, a former convict, had been incarcerated for theft and burglary and had recently been freed. Jack's mother was deeply dependent on narcotics and engaged in personal services to fund her habit. Jack suffered repeated mistreatment by his uncle, making life incredibly challenging for the young child. He resorted to stealing to avoid starvation. All the welfare money the family received ended up with his mother, and no one else ever saw it again. The funds were used to satisfy her destructive tendencies. His parents constantly argued, and their separation was marked by his mother's fractured nose and his father's abandonment. According to Jack, he acquired the skill of thievery from his father's family members. They saw nothing unethical about it, and did not consider it dishonorable to take what was poorly secured. At age 15, Jack was expelled from home because he did not get along with his new stepfather. From that point on, the boy lived on the streets, sleeping in the back seats of vehicles and on the stairways of apartment complexes. If he was famished, he simply broke into residences in search of sustenance. At age 17, Jack was imprisoned for the first time after being convicted of burglary. He himself maintained that he had never exhibited aggression and violence until he was behind bars. There, he simply had to become resilient and be able to defend himself to survive. Nevertheless, upon his release, Jack was prepared to transform, become a law-abiding citizen and a respectable member of society, but his criminal history would not release its grip. It was challenging for him to secure employment. No one wanted to associate with an ex-convict. During that period, Jack encountered a woman who had 2 children from prior relationships. He even desired to wed her, but due to the absence of employment, he lacked the funds to finance the wedding. Jack concluded that the optimal way to begin a new life and embark on a path to redemption was to rob a bank. Then he would possess the resources for the wedding and time to establish himself and obtain a legitimate job. That's how it all commenced. He intended to commit a robbery to start a new life without crime. Let's journey back to 1973 in the city of Winnipeg, Manitoba. At that time, the city's population was approximately 500,000 residents. The crime rate in this area was quite elevated, Winnipeg was one of the top cities in Canada in terms of the number of violent offenses per capita. On November 21, 1973, around 11 p.m., Jack Wayne Bender and his accomplice, Dwight Douglas Lucas, were searching for a vehicle to steal so they could later evade the authorities in it. Bender was 22 years old at the time, and his accomplice, Dwight Lucas, was 19. Despite Lucas's young age, he had an extensive history of convictions. At the age of 14, he was removed from the Winnipeg Children's Home, an open facility for emotionally troubled children, because the staff deemed him potentially dangerous. By the age of 16, he had already been labeled a serious troublemaker. From the age of 10, Lucas was in and out of institutions. Lucas had always been an aggressive child, but the court appeared reluctant to keep him in custody for an extended period and continued to give him opportunities for rehabilitation. However, each time he was released, he became more malicious and agitated than the previous time. During his last stint in prison, Lucas expressed an interest in becoming a butcher. By a tragic twist of fate, he would have such an opportunity. 3 months after his release from prison, he encountered Jack Bender, and they devised a joint plan for bank robberies. So, on November 21, 1973, they were searching for a suitable vehicle when they noticed a van belonging to Alan and Michael Hurt. However, the attempt to steal failed. They were spotted by the Hurt brothers' employer, who raised the alarm. Bender and Lucas fled, but the van owners pursued them. The pursuers were armed with 2 axes, a pair of knives, and a semi-automatic rifle. The men in the van quickly caught up with the 2 fugitives and attempted to stop them, but Jack and Lucas were also armed with a gun and knives. When they tried to initiate a conversation, the brothers themselves fell right into their trap. Before they could react, Jack and Lucas aimed their weapons at them. Threatening violence, the criminals dragged the brothers out of the car, then bound them both with some ropes discovered in the vehicle and threw them into the back seat of the van. The day before, Bender had been consuming illegal drugs. Now that the effect of the pills was nearly over, and he was starting to come to his senses, Jack realized the gravity of their actions. In fact, he and his partner had abducted these individuals, and now they were facing 17 to 20 years in prison. The only way out of this predicament was to simply send the witnesses to the afterlife. Then no one would know anything. The lives of Alan and Michael Hurt were vastly different from the existence of Jack Bender and Dwight Lucas. The brothers grew up in a loving, tight-knit family. Michael was born in June 1946 and Alan in October 1953. They spent their childhood in San Diego, California, and later relocated to Omaha, Nebraska. At the age of 20, Michael got married, and a year later he enlisted in the Marine Corps, where he served for about 30 months before deserting. Then he and his wife moved to Canada, and soon the couple had a daughter. After several visits to his brother in Canada, Alan and his mother also moved to Winnipeg, so the family could reside near each other and see each other more frequently. Michael and Alan Hurt worked at the city's fruit and vegetable market. Michael managed the store, and Alan secured a part-time job there shortly after moving to Canada. On the night of November 21, 1973, both brothers were working at the store. They parked their van just a few feet from the door behind the building. The Hurts were filling baskets with fruit in the store's warehouse when they suddenly heard a car horn coming from the backyard. The store owner, Mr. Amazzini, went to investigate and saw a man holding open the driver's door of the Hurt brothers' truck. The stranger was of medium height and average build, wearing a light coat. Unfortunately, in the darkness, Amazzini could not discern the man's face. He only managed to startle him. The intruder slammed the van door shut and headed into the nearest alley, where approximately 50 feet from the store, another man was waiting for him. The owner returned inside and informed Mike about the incident, inquiring if he had anything valuable inside the vehicle. The elder Hurt went outside, started the van, turned on the headlights, and noticed 2 men calmly walking away down the alley. Michael hurriedly rushed into the building and shouted to his brother that they would go after the robbers. Alan initially intended to leave everything as it was, but then he noticed that his hunting knife had disappeared from the cab. From readiness, he sat in the passenger seat. Inside the vehicle, he found a cheap-looking foreign glove. The Hurt brothers, in an agitated state, drove out of the parking lot and circled the area in an attempt to pick up the trail of the robbers. In the back were 2 axes and 2 shovels, because the day before, Michael and Alan had uprooted several bushes from their yard. The brothers drove around the block several times but saw no one. They were about to return to the store empty-handed when suddenly they noticed 2 suspicious men, Jack and Lucas, in the next alley. They decided to initiate a conversation with them. Michael asked if he had lost anything and showed them the glove, to which Lucas answered, "Yes," and pointed a gun at him. At this time, Jack opened the van door and pressed the stolen hunting knife against Alan's back. For a brief moment, Jack and Lucas were at a loss. The criminals seemed to be confused about what to do next. Most likely this did not fit into their grand plan to rob a bank. Then they forced both brothers into the back seat of the truck. Lucas sat in the driver's seat, and Jack sat in the passenger seat, holding both brothers at gunpoint. Lucas tried to start the car, but the engine kept stalling. After the third failed attempt, Michael Hurt volunteered to take the kidnappers where they needed to go, and they agreed. Jack moved to the back seat, and Lucas moved to the passenger seat, taking the gun from Jack. The criminals advised the brothers to keep quiet and get away from this place as soon as possible. Then Bender took his own meat-carving knife out of his pocket and made several threatening lunges toward Alan, who was sitting next to him. He was looking around the truck when he unexpectedly noticed the axes in the back of the van. His eyes lit up with a wild gleam, and a terrible thought formed in his head. Jack thought that he had never done it with an axe before. Jack then reached for one of the tools and swung at Alan. He even tried to hit him on the left leg a couple of times, but Hurt pulled his legs back and the axe struck the floor of the van. After that, Jack began boasting about the number of people he claimed to have killed with firearms and knives. At that moment, the criminal's face looked truly deranged. Jack could not calm down and began groping in the dark at the back of the van. He felt a semi-automatic Remington rifle belonging to the brothers and asked Alan if it was in working order. Because Jack was waving the weapon around in the confined vehicle and acting like a madman, even Lucas became nervous. He asked his accomplice to calm down and said that they were not going to shoot anyone because they did not need to. While about 25 miles from Winnipeg, near some hydraulic structure, Lucas ordered them to stop, saying it was a pretty good spot. Throughout the ride, Alan and Michael were anxious, but at that moment, they felt for the first time that they were both in real peril. The kidnappers pulled the hostages out of the van and forced them to lie face down in the snow. Then the brothers heard the criminals quietly conversing with each other. Jack told Lucas that it would be too loud, after which the crunch of footsteps on the snow that had fallen the day before was heard. Alan raised his head and saw Lucas standing in front of him with a gun in his hand. Right next to him appeared Jack with one of the 2 axes. The brothers realized what lay ahead. Michael pleaded for his life, saying that he had a wife and child at home, but Jack only grinned. The first blow landed on Alan's back and the man screamed in pain. This did not stop Jack. He said the brothers were too old to cry and directed the axe at Michael, then began swinging it erratically back and forth, taking turns. He struck again and again. Alan was wounded in the right arm and back. From the pain, he buried his face in the snow and heard the blade hit something, followed by a sickening crunch. Michael's voice could no longer be heard. Alan did not lose consciousness but fell into a stupor. His entire body was pierced by unbearable pain, and there was a ringing emptiness in his head. He realized that something irreparable had just occurred. He was pulled out of oblivion by Jack's piercing, hysterical voice shouting that the brothers were dead, after which he threw the axe in the snow and the footsteps began to recede. Alan told his brother that they were gone, but there was no response. 27-year-old Michael was dead. About 300 feet from where the Hurt brothers were attacked stood a barn. Somehow, despite the fact that both his hands were still tied and he was seriously wounded, Alan was able to get up and head for help towards the barn. The farm belonged to William and Willard Gesner, who lived there with their elderly father. According to William, he opened the door and saw a man with a bloody face. 20-year-old Allen was taken to the hospital, where he was under 24-hour police guard. Fortunately, it did not take detectives long to find Jack and Lucas. The perpetrators were caught in another crime when they tried to steal an unmarked police car. They were surrounded and taken into custody. While being interrogated separately about the attempted car theft, Dwight Lucas asked the police what sentence he would get for killing people, essentially a confession. The criminal claimed that he had sent the two brothers to the afterlife with an axe and threw their bodies in a field, thinking they would not be found until spring. Of course, this was untrue, because it was not Lucas, but Jack Bender who struck the fatal blows. However, this did not diminish the guilt of Lucas, who was standing next to him at the time. Both criminals, Jack Bender and Dwight Lucas, behaved in an extremely provocative manner during the trial. They constantly giggled, cursed, mocked the prosecution witnesses, and treated the entire process as a joke. They even jeered at the judge, throwing paper airplanes at him. The prosecutor described Jack as a hyena with a disgusting grin. Meanwhile, the only surviving witness, Alan Hurt, having recovered his health, left Canada and returned to the United States. The police ensured his safety and watched over him during each visit to Canada, as his testimony was crucial to sentencing the criminals to life in prison. At the trial, Alan identified Jack as the attacker, pointing at him and saying, "That's the one who's laughing now." Jack and Lucas did not speak in their defense and did not present evidence of their innocence. In just an hour, the jury unanimously found them guilty of the murder of Michael Hurt and the attempted murder of Alan. After another 20 minutes, the jury unanimously recommended that the possibility of parole be granted only after 20 years. On June 26, 1974, Jack Bender and Dwight Lucas were sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 20 years. The judge emphasized that people capable of such a cruel and senseless massacre should be removed from society forever. But even this did not dampen the mood of the criminals. Lucas continued to grin and shouted that he would be released at 39, while Jack just sat silently smiling. However, as soon as the convicts were sent to serve their sentences, they started to stir. Just 3 days after the sentence, Jack filed an appeal, writing it in pencil on parchment paper. He demanded to appeal the sentence on the grounds of the absence of irrefutable evidence. But the appeals department immediately rejected the petition, as life imprisonment for such a crime was mandatory. However, it did not take long for the convicts to start ruining their own lives and the lives of those around them again. On June 9, 1975, Dwight Lucas, along with 2 other inmates, somehow managed to obtain several butcher knives and take 15 prison staff members hostage. They locked the guards and other workers in a storage warehouse, and later had the audacity to demand their freedom in exchange for the people they were holding hostage. The rebels called themselves political prisoners, although they all had a lengthy list of crimes of a completely different nature and were far from politics. The remaining inmates were placed in quarantine, and the confrontation lasted for almost 2 days until a tactical squad stormed the warehouse and disarmed the attackers. All the hostages survived except for 32-year-old Mary Steinhauser. This woman spent most of her time with a knife pressed to her throat, but died from a bullet while the other prisoners were being freed. The hostage-taking incident brought Lucas an additional 14 years, which he will serve concurrently with his life sentence. If this incident did not seem terrible enough, it was repeated less than 8 months later. Apparently, the Correctional Service of Canada did not learn its lesson the first time, and again let down its guard. On February 20th, 1976, Dwight Lucas, along with 2 other inmates, held 2 prison guards hostage for 14 hours. It all started in the morning when the criminals, armed with sharp table knives, attacked the guards as they were releasing them from their cells into the common recreation room. The confrontation ended when a local TV channel broadcast a promise from the director of the penitentiary that the inmates' demands would be met. One of the main demands that was agreed upon was the transfer of all 3 from the prison in British Columbia to Dorchester on the East Coast. Dorchester is one of the oldest prisons in Canada, and to put it mildly, not the most pleasant place. All institutions of this type do not have a reputation for good relations, but this one had a particularly notorious reputation. What the inmates wanted, no one understood. In 1977, Dwight Lucas and Jack Bender were reunited in prison with another convicted felon. The trio attempted to escape from the new maximum security unit of Millhaven Prison and almost succeeded. The inmates crawled through a steel grate on the window of a second-floor cell and jumped 20 feet to the ground. All three managed to reach the outer perimeter wall before being caught by a guard. Only one shot was fired over their heads as they approached the fence, and all three immediately surrendered. The criminals were wearing gloves and carrying a blanket intended to protect against the barbed wire stretched above the wall. The prison block in Millhaven was still under construction, and apparently, the inmates used a hacksaw belonging to the construction crew to escape. All these incidents occurred in the first 3 years of their life sentences. Then Jack and Lucas quieted down for a while and calmly served their time. The lull lasted until 1984, when Jack Bender wrote an article for the Edmonton Journal advocating for the creation of a correctional labor colony. He stated that the maintenance of prisons was too expensive for the Canadian government, that they did not reform, and that no rehabilitation was carried out in them. He called prisons torture chambers for inmates. Jack criticized the government for spending taxpayers' money unwisely, simply throwing it to the wind. His proposal was to create a labor colony on an island off the west coast. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. Several years later, Bender gave an interview to the same journal, but not about his ideas for a labor colony, but in connection with his marriage that took place behind bars. The article was titled, "Love Behind Bars," and told the story of Jack and his wife Laverne, who married in 1986. The prosecutor who sent Jack to prison called the article madness that was allowed to penetrate the Canadian penitentiary system. Jack Bender, serving his sentence, wanted someone to write to him and come visit him. Back in October 1983, he placed an ad in a local newspaper, to which 11 women responded. This is how he eventually met his first wife. Of course, Jack embellished his story, saying that he had unintentionally taken a person's life while trying to rob them. According to his future wife, Jack made a good impression. She liked him after the very first meeting. His behavior reminded her of a lost puppy. The man turned out to be very sensitive, sociable, and friendly. Less than 2 months later, Jack was sent to solitary confinement for 13 weeks on suspicion of preparing an escape. During this time, his future wife visited him 26 times. Surprisingly, at that time, even prisoners sent to solitary confinement apparently had the right to visitation privileges. Laverne continued to visit Jack for 2.5 years. When Jack finally talked about marriage, the woman agreed, and they were married in the prison corridor. The only physical contact that day was the ring placed on the bride's finger through a wire mesh. Laverne had 2 children from previous relationships, and this marriage turned into 2 more innocent victims of Jack Bender, as they had now become the adopted children of a convicted axe villain. In 1987, Jack's former accomplice, Dwight Lucas, also announced that he was going to apply for parole. He considered himself an exemplary prisoner, apparently forgetting that he had twice taken prison staff hostage, participated in an escape attempt, and witnessed the axe murder of 2 innocent young people. Lucas claimed that 15 months of psychiatric treatment, training as an artist, and taking courses to obtain a high school diploma had made him a different person. Friends and relatives of the deceased Michael Hurt were outraged that Lucas dared to ask for this, but unfortunately in 1990, the National Parole Board considered Lucas's application. Jack Bender testified at his former accomplice's hearing and told the jury that Lucas had not played a major role, had not shed blood, and had merely stood by. In January 1991, after spending only 17 years in prison, Dwight Lucas was released on parole. The public reaction was about what one would expect, but it took time to amend flawed laws, and it took another 20 years to repeal the faint hope clause. Meanwhile, Jack's life was filled with various events. In 1996, he and 3 other inmates were charged with the murder of Bertrand Mayeron, who had bullied other criminals and paid for it. In the end, everyone was acquitted. Then a peculiar story emerged about Jack Bender's sham marriage to a woman named Margot Retzky, and Jack again came to the attention of the authorities. Such was the dramatic prison life of Jack Bender from 1973 to 1999, and then suddenly, everything quieted down. For 20 years, up until 2019, there was nothing heard about him in the news. Over the years, Jack achieved a minimum level of supervision. Once, during a prisoner check, the colony staff found one person missing. No one noticed how Jack simply left. He was absent for a brief time, as he was quickly apprehended by the police. The man had attempted to escape again. Today, Jack Bender is 71 years old and still behind bars. This man has never shown any remorse for the kidnapping and axe attack on the Hurt brothers. He only regretted that he allowed one of them to survive and crawl to the farmhouse, and he was sincere in his statement. After all, if Alan had not survived, Jack would not have been caught and sentenced to life in prison. Jack applied for full and daytime parole several times, but was constantly denied. His last attempt was made in 2021, but in reality, Jack did nothing to convince the parole board that he had truly changed. Apart from his failed escapes, he seems to have come to terms with the fact that prison is his home, and it is unlikely that this man could stay free for long, since he has neither family nor close friends there. However, the man has a profile on a dating site for Canadian prisoners, which is a combination of self-centered statements and delusional chatter. Jack claims that he is an artist, songwriter, and has written several books, although there is no evidence of this. Jack Bender has spent over 50 years behind bars, which is one of the longest sentences in Canada. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.